So today we're going to get into learning how to cut out subjects and create transparent backgrounds to create out PNG files. In the presentation on the assignment section in Canvas, there are 5 images in the Photoshop cutting out a subject, part 1. I'm going to right click on each image, click open image in new tab, and they will download onto our computer. Before we do get into Photoshop, we have clicked on the Google slide for submission, and we created a copy of this presentation so that we can actually edit and add in our images that we are going to create. We're going to see the difference between a JPEG file and a PNG, so we can understand having a background where you're restricted with a JPEG file. It will automatically fill in with white if it is not a color background. Whereas with a PNG file, also known as a portable network graphic, it allows you to have transparent backgrounds. So your quality-wise of an image, it works a lot better with a presentation, creating a better balance of text and image. But now that we've downloaded the 5 images, understand that we are going to be placing all the JPEGs and PNGs into these 5 slides. Looking at the apple, we'll see the difference with a white background of the JPEG versus the transparency of the PNG. So we're going to go over to Photoshop and we're going to go to File, Open, or you can click Open on the left side navigation. Clicking Open, I'm going to go over to my downloads and select out the 5 projects that we're working with. I'm going to click Open, and they will open up into separate tabs along the top navigation. You can see Apple, Umbrella, Male Portrait, Pink Hair, and Puppy. If I'd like to zoom in, I can hit Command or Control plus. Allows me to focus in on the subject. Some are a little bit higher quality images, but getting into selecting out the subject and separating it from the background, we're going to take a look at the 4th tool, left side navigation. If I click and hold on the 4th tool, left side, we have 3 different options that we can work with. We have the Object Selection tool, Quick Selection tool, and Magic Wand tool. All 3 do work, but they all have their own specific ability to use these tools. We're going to start with the Quick Selection tool and understand how it works. With the Quick Selection tool, I can adjust the size of my brush using the right or left bracket. Hitting right bracket makes my brush bigger, left bracket makes my brush smaller. You'll notice inside of the cursor, there's a little plus sign appearing. This plus sign represents that we are adding a selection. If I were to simply go right into the middle of the apple and click, it's only going to select relatively the exact area that I've clicked on. If you really want to use the quick selection to your advantage, you want to actually click and drag into the subject, and as you get bigger into the selection, it's going to recognize the entire object and create the selection around the entire piece. It gets the stem, it gets all the elements of the apple, and now we have the object selected. It works very well. It's just a matter of understanding that if I were to start out, if I click on a point, it's only going to select out a certain little portion. But if I start to click and drag, it will take a second, but recognize the entire object. Before we get into cutting out the subject from the background, we're going to take a look at the other options. The Object Selection tool on the left side allows us to be able to select on the object. Depending on the version of Photoshop that you're using, you may get a highlighted area over top of the subject. With the 2024 version, you will get the highlighted pink area over top of the subject to really separate it and recognize that it is looking at the entire object. In 2023 or earlier versions, you may not get the selection around the object. So you would have to still create the selection without knowing what it's going to, or if it's going to recognize the entire piece. But if I want to select out the subject, you're not just selecting out a little piece. Again, very much similar to the Quick Selection tool. You want to look to select out over the majority of the area, if not the entire object. If I miss the right side and bottom of this apple, the computer and Photoshop will recognize the entire area and still be able to identify the entire piece. It still separates from that black background because it's very easy to recognize the difference between the color versus the black background. But just understand that you have the ability to use both tools. I'm going to deselect one more time. And the third tool that we're taking a look at is the Magic Wand tool. With the Magic Wand tool, if I were to click on top of the apple, it's not actually selecting the entire apple. What it's doing is selecting out a color range. If I go to different variations of the apple, you'll see that it pick up relatively the similar tone of the red. But if I go into the highlight, it only picks up the highlight, or the mid-tone between the highlight and the red, we get that mid-tone selected out. If I wanted to add in areas, I could hold down Shift and click on multiple areas. But again, it's not selecting out everything. It's not getting these little tiny areas that are different variations or different colors. And it's going to end up leaving you with open spaces. So I would recommend that you use either the Quick Selection tool or Object Selection tool. The last option that you couldn't consider on this bottom taskbar, if I want to get into, you see that they have an option for selecting a subject. Because it's very easy to recognize the subject versus the black background, if I click on this, again, it will do a great job of recognizing the apple, putting the dotted lines, the ants marching line around the area of the apple. If you do not see the taskbar on the bottom underneath of your subject, you can always go up to Window at the top navigation and make sure that your contextual taskbar is checked on. If it's not checked on, just click on it and you will get that visibly at the bottom. So if I turn it off, you see it disappear. But Window, contextual taskbar, and it reappears. This gives you a number of shortcuts that you can use to be able to deselect the subject, invert the selection, or adding in a layer mask, which we're going to take a look at momentarily. There are other options as well, but we're not going to get into filling the selection or working with the adjustments layer. But on this taskbar, as I mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at how to separate the subject from the background. On this bottom taskbar, we see this white square with a black circle. This is known as a layer mask. We can also find this located at the bottom of the layers panel, where we have layer mask, again, a white square with a little black circle inside. When I click on this, because I have the selection around the apple, it's going to hide out the background, only leaving us with the apple image. If we take a closer look over at the layers panel, you'll notice that there now is a thumbnail next to the apple image. This thumbnail is the mask itself. If you notice the mask, the white area represents the apple itself, and the black area represents what was the black background. The white area is representing the live area, what's visible, what can be seen. The black area is representing the dead area, what's hidden away, but is still there. But now that I have this cut out from our background, we want to really see what the difference is between a JPEG versus a PNG. This should be a transparency, but if we go to File, Save a Copy, I'm going to save my work as a JPEG for right now. I'm just going to leave it as Apple One copy. I'm going to save it on my downloads and make sure my file format says JPEG. I click Save and click OK on the pop-up. Now that we saved it as a JPEG, we're going to go back up to File. This time we're going to go File, Save a Copy again. Instead of a JPEG though, we're going to change the format style to a PNG. Alphabetical order, just look for PNG. We can leave it as the same name, just understand that we're going to see the file type at the end of the document, and I'm going to click Save. Click OK on the pop-up. Now we both have a JPEG and a PNG saved. We're going to go back over to our browser and over to our presentation. You can see that I've already listed out where we're putting our JPEG image and our PNG image. I'm going to go to the top navigation of Google Slides, go down to Insert, Image, and Upload from your computer. Depending on if you're on a Mac or on a PC, you can see the abbreviation or the file type at the end of the document, or recognize the kind section, the type of file that you're working with. We have a JPEG and a PNG. I'm going to choose out the JPEG first, click open, and you'll notice that even though we had a transparent background, it's automatically been filled in with white. And this is going to happen whenever you're saving it as a JPEG. But if we go into inserting the image of the PNG, the same exact image, knowing that we've created that transparent background, I select the file. And before I do click open, you may notice that over in the size, the PNG file is a lot larger than the JPEG file. There's a lot more to register because it is a transparent image. But when I go to open, I place it in, you see that it's maintaining that transparency that we were looking for. If I were to bring it over to the other apples, it overlaps. Stacking in front of them, not seeing anything blocking from the other apples. And that's the most important part, is understanding that the PNG is going to provide you that simple transparency so that the object can stand out, whatever type of presentation you put it in. So we have our apples complete. Now we're going to go through the other 4 images. The other 4 images are a lot more complicated. Starting out with the umbrella, we're going to be using a combination of tools, and everybody has their own preference. It's just a matter of figuring out what tools work best for you. Back over at Photoshop, I can close out my apple. If I want to save it as a Photoshop so I can maintain the thumbnail in the background, I can save it. Just make sure that it's a PSD file and click save. Now we have an umbrella, and we're going to look to separate our umbrella from this more complicated background. We have an ocean view, sky, many things happening behind it, but we're looking to select just the umbrella itself. Again, we have the ability to go through our options on the left side navigation. If I want to use object selection, I can click and drag from over top the entire area, selecting over top of our umbrella. And it does a good job overall, but there are little areas that you have to recognize that were not selected. Close to the opening or bottom of the umbrella, you'll notice that these little white nubs were not added into the selection. And this is going to be a consistent theme on different areas of these nubs. They're just hard to recognize and separate from our background. At the top navigation, we can see that just little areas are not cleaned up, but we're going to look to eventually add those selections in. If I don't like what the object select has provided me, I can always go over to deselect, Control D, or click on deselect on the bottom nav bar. But I would not necessarily recommend either the magic wand or quick selection. The magic wand is only going to select out color ranges. When it comes into the more complicated water elements, it's never going to select out all those areas, especially as we get into the more white elements of the water. The quick selection tool can work, and if I take my time to select over the areas, I'm going to deselect first to make sure everything's selected out. But if I click and drag over top of the area, I can get the majority of our umbrella's main portion, but I am going to have to reduce my brush size and take my time to be very careful going down the pole to try getting all of these elements. It does a pretty good job overall, but if your hand's a little bit unsteady, or if you don't shrink your brush down far enough, you can end up selecting areas that you do not want. I'm going to deselect, and I'm going to click on Select Subject down at the bottom. With the Select Subject, I can notice, and I have done this several times before, that some areas of these white nubs, we're going to start at the top one to see, as I zoom in, Control plus sign or Command plus sign, there are white areas that are being left open and not selected. If I want to add in these selections, I can use the quick selection tool. If I want to click and drag with the quick selection tool, just use your cursor, drag over the white areas that you wanted added. Just be careful not to go outside of the selection. If you end up going outside the selection, you can pick up some sky, and then it becomes more difficult to take that selection away. But I can always hit Command or Control Z to undo. Now that I have this white nub at the top selected, the more difficult areas are going to be the nubs down towards the bottom of the opening of the umbrella. With these white nubs on the ends of the umbrella, I could shrink my brush down using the left bracket, shrinking down the size of the brush and dragging over the white nub to make sure it's selected. But there's areas that I can see in between the nub and the umbrella that I need to deselect. And rather than using the quick selection tool, I would recommend the polygon lasso tool. Polygon lasso tool is clicking point by point to cut out selections and cut out areas that we do not want. If I want to cut out this blue sky inside around the nub, I first have to hold down Alt or Option, Alt on a PC, Option on a Mac, and I will see a little minus symbol appear. With the minus symbol, I'm going to click a point, and then I'm going to click point by point to draw around the area of the blue sky that I don't want part of my selection. I'm going to go back out to where I started, and when I get back to where I started and I close up this selection, you see that blue area now deselected. Now if I move over to these other white nubs, I want to do the same thing, but this time we're adding in the selection. Rather than deselecting out areas, we're actually going to hold Shift to add in areas of selection. So I'm going to hold down Shift on my keyboard, and you see a little plus sign appear. With this plus sign appearing, I can click point by point to draw around the areas that I want. Getting back to where I started so that the nub is added into the selection. I'm going to go over to each nub, making sure that they are part of the selection. Take your time, make sure that you're accurate with it. If you need to zoom in closer, get closer with the area. We're just trying to make sure that we get what looks like the nub selected out and added into this selected area. Finally, the nub on the left side of our umbrella. Again, I'm going to hold down Shift, click point by point to add in the area. If you're not able to find where you started with the selection, if you double click, you should be able to get the selection. If you actually click too many times, you can always hit Control Z to get the selection back, just undoing the over selection that would have deselected out the entire piece. But once we have the areas at the top of the umbrella, we do want to add in, make sure that we get the other elements of the umbrella. I may be particular and make sure that I get these little elements of red along the pole. But the main area that we want to focus in is making sure to cut out the areas of the handle and add in the areas of the handle that were not selected. To add in the areas of the handle, I'm going to hold down Shift. Again, click point by point, drawing around the white areas so that they become part of the selection. And cut across, because we are going to look to cut out this area around the handle. I'm going to hold down Alt or Option. So I see the minus symbol. I can let go of Alt or Option because I've started this selection, but I'm just looking to draw around the area where I see the water and then get back to where I started. So I cut that area of the selection out. So now I have the entire area of the umbrella selected. Now because of this, we can go over to our layer mask, click on the layer mask, and we get that transparency with everything of the umbrella selected out. We want to look to save this. Again, we're going to go File, Save a Copy. I'm going to change the format to PNG. You're welcome to rename it. For myself, I can identify the copy is going to be the version that we're going to be using. I click Save, OK. Go back over to my presentation, and I can go up to File or Insert at the top navigation, Image, Upload from your computer, and choose out the PNG version of our umbrella and click Open. You can see that as I bring it into our presentation, it creates a lot more dynamic visual having this transparent background. If I want to scale it up, I can make it larger. If I want to play with the rotation of the object, putting on an angle makes it a lot more intriguing when I go into a full slideshow. So think about how these transparent backgrounds can now create a lot more aesthetically pleasing presentations. Now that we've done our umbrella, we're going to take a look at the male's portrait. And we are going to have to use a couple new tools that we have not seen before. I can close out the umbrella image. Feel free to save it as a Photoshop file so you have it. But now with our male subject, we have to work with the hair, with the strands of hair that are coming off the goatee or off his hair on the top. And it's just a matter of being very meticulous to make sure that we get all the areas selected out. So we have the ability to use the three tools that we took a look at earlier. Magic wand, quick selection, object selection all work. But we've come more accustomed to using the subject select at the bottom, especially dealing with such a simple background. It should have an easier job selecting out the overall area. So when I click on select the subject, I can take a look at it did a pretty good job overall selecting out the subject. But if I take a closer look, you're going to notice that there are a few issues. Whether it's down on the hair around his neck, or cutting out some areas on the neck itself, or leaving out strands of hair around the chin, around the mustache, or on the top of his head. Hairs are being left out and not incorporated into the selection. We want to make sure that we're getting all the selection as best possible. If I were to just simply add a mask now, and I go to save this as a JPEG or PNG, I want you to be able to see the difference between this version and what will be the final version. So I'm going to save this as a copy. I'm going to rename the file for right now. No RE, which will be Refine Edge, just so I can identify and easily see it for later on. Back in the presentation, I'm just going to look to place in that picture so we can see the difference when it is on this blue background. I go up to Insert, Image, upload the picture. So from a distance, it doesn't look too bad. But if I take a closer look, we're going to notice that it doesn't look natural on the bottom of his chin, or certain areas are just not added into the overall selection. And you just want to be careful of this because we want to really get the subject so it can be displayed on any type of background. But to see the difference, I'm going to shrink these both down a little bit. Going back over to subject, I'm going to hit Command or Control Z, bringing back the selection of the area. If I wanted to deselect so we can make sure that we're going through the entire process, this time we're going to do a correct. We're going to click on Select Subject at the bottom. We see that it does a pretty good job overall, but again, a couple areas that we need to fix and add in. To really make this work, we're going to go up to Select at the top navigation. Under Select, you're going to click on Select and Mask. Select the mask is going to bring you into another view. With this view, we want to make sure that the view on the top right is displaying overlay. This overlay allows us to see the separations of the background versus the selected area. And this allows me to really identify the areas of gray or the areas that might have cut off certain elements on his skin that I don't want to be displayed or ruined. So the first tool that we're going to be taking a look at over on the left side navigation, if I move my cursors over on the left side here, we have the quick selection tool, the refine edge tool, which will be extremely important, and the brush tool. I'm going to start out with the brush tool, third tool left side. With the brush tool, I want to identify and look at particularly the above the eyelid and down by the neck, we can see that there's red areas added into that selected area. What we want to do is bring back the skin tone of that. To do this, I'm going to use my brush and paint back over top of the skin area so that we're revealing back his skin. Above the eye as well. Again, we're going to bring back that highlight just so we're seeing his skin and not that red sitting over top of it. You're welcome to look around the edges of the rest of the image. Overall, it's done pretty well. I can always go back through if I want to touch up some edges or I feel like the edges of the shirt are a little bit rough. Feel free to clean them up using this brush tool. Just clicking and dragging over the areas so it's a little bit smoother overall. Now that I can look around his neck and face, see that there's no areas being cut out accidentally. Now we're going to notice that there are several gray areas. These gray areas were part of the background, but they're being mixed up with his hair, and his hair strands are being separated from the rest of the image. We want to incorporate them so it looks more natural, but we want to eliminate out this gray that's sitting between them. To do this, we're going to go over to our Refine Edge tool. The Refine Edge tool, left side navigation, second icon, we see listed as a Refine Edge tool. The Refine Edge, Refine Selection Edges and enhances edge details. So this tool is going to be best used to bring out those hair strands and make it look more natural. I'm going to up the size of my brush using the right bracket and clicking and dragging over top of the areas, having my cursor basically go halfway over the hair and halfway over the red areas. I'm going to click and drag. And yes, as I drag, you're going to see it looks like it's eliminating out all the red. But what it's going to do is recognize the hair strands versus the background. And when I release with my mouse, it actually adds in those hair strands as part of the selection. You want to be careful that you focus on just the areas of the hair because they're black strands. They're going to be now separating from the gray. But don't bring it too far into any skin tones, or else you may end up cutting off some elements of the person's face. But these hair strands will now be picked up, eliminating out the gray background. By zooming closer to the eyebrow, the same thing we can do. I'm going to shrink my brush down a little bit. Just make sure to click and drag over top of the eyebrow area. And we see that the gray is eliminated in between the eyebrows. I'm going to zoom out a little bit more. Again, going in between the hair strands, I'm going to eliminate the gray that I see between the hair strands. Making sure I'm not necessarily touching the hair or the head itself, but just getting in between the hair strands. Again, I'm just going to shrink down my brush, so I'm making sure to get the little areas, but overall it starts to separate the gray from the hair. If you accidentally get a little bit too much into the skin, we start to see red, just go back over to the third tool, brush tool, and you can add that skin tone back into the selection. But again, back over the Refine Edge tool, going into the gaps of the hair, eliminating out the gray. But now as we get towards the top of the head, there are a number of hair strands that aren't being added into the selection. What I'm going to do is increase the size of my brush. I'm going to go around the edges of these black strands. It will still eliminate out the gray, but it's going to pick up these little black strands that we're getting erased out. But the particular area that we want to take a look at are these higher strands on top of the head. There's a couple of random strands that come off of it, and I'm just going to go towards the top of the head to make sure that they are all incorporated. And I'm going to go all the way around the top of his head to make sure that these strands are being added into the selection. I'm not going too far into the black. If you go too far into the black, you're going to start to erase out some of the black hair. but just going around the outside edges, it will do the job for you of being able to recognize and separate these hair strands so that they don't accidentally be left out. Don't go with too large of a brush again. We're just looking to go around the edges of the hair. And you can see as the red is being added, it's separating those black hair strands from the background. I'm basically just going down to the bottom of the neck where the strands meet the shirt. And as I zoom out, we can see this a lot more clear of bringing out the strands of his hair. Again, if you want to make sure that you got in all the areas, just click and drag around those areas with the Refine Edge tool. Now that I've had these areas selected out, I'm going to go down to the bottom right corner and click OK. And now I can see that the selection around the chin area and some on the top head of the area, or head area, are a little bit more refined overall, a little bit more specific to where I want to select it. So now that I have the selection, again, I'm going to go down to the layer mask, or you can go over onto your bottom bar, click on the layer mask, and we get that separation. It's hard to see with the transparency, but we're going to go over to File, save a copy. This time with the male portrait copy, PNG, so that we can maintain our transparency. Once it's saved, we want to go to insert this image. I'm going to go to Image, Upload from Computer, and choose out the now refined edges so it's a more clear image. So from a distance, it doesn't look like anything's changed. But if we take a closer look, I want you to recognize and see the difference, particularly around the chin area. So down on the middle image, the first image that we saved, you can see a couple areas of gray in between the hairs of his chin. You're also getting a very blunt cut of the hairs of the chin. But over on the right, it's a lot more natural. You're getting the hair strands that pop off of the chin area. The back hairs are a lot more clear. But particularly on the top, it's a little bit more refined to picking up the strands so they're a little bit smoother overall on the head. Again, if I'm taking a very closer look, before it actually was cutting out part of the neck area and above the eyebrow. But now we've incorporated the eyelid area and cleaned up the neck. So it's now a more cohesive, better selected area with the subject. So I'm going to take out the original second image, and I can scale back up these two images so we can now see the difference a lot better. So again, just taking a closer look, we see how well, because we use the Refine Edge tool, that we've cleared out the grays and maintained the little strands of hairs all around his head. No grays areas were left out in between, and it becomes a stronger overall selection. Now that we've completed his photo, we're going to move over to our pink hair subject. For our subject with the pink hair, it's not as high quality of an image, but it will still work the same way. If I go down to select a subject, and I would just do the basic settings, I go over to File, save a copy, pink hair, no refined edges. I'm going to save this just to see the difference. It's a lot different when you're dealing with a black background versus a background with lighter color and darker subject features. So I'm going to go up to Image, Insert, choose the picture. Just make sure to actually add the layer mask. And it didn't do a bad job overall. It's just a matter that certain areas of the hair are still leaving some black areas. It also cut out some areas on the shirt. But if we're seeing any issues, or if we want to test out other selections as well, I can always go back over to my options, try Object Select, click and drag over the subject. Now with the Object Select, again, I'm going to go to Layer Mask. This one did a little bit different selection. You see that it didn't leave the black down on the bottom right. And you have to kind of figure out which one is the best option. But what you want to avoid, I'm going to step back just so we can see it. The magic wand was a great tool for an object like the apple. But if I select on the black background behind the subject, and I invert my selection, yes, it does do a job of selecting around the subject, but when I add a layer mask, you're going to see that it leaves a lot of black chunks on the top of the head. The areas aren't really refined. They need to be cleaned up a lot. This is what we want to avoid. So I'm going to Command or Control Z, step back, and I can deselect. You can always try the quick selection tool. If I click and drag inside the subject, again, just trying to click and drag around the area of the hair, it does an okay job, but it doesn't get all these hair strands at the top. I can go down into the body, but again, it does a pretty good job overall, but doesn't get everything as precise as I'd like it. So again, adding a layer mask, you can see the difference. It doesn't look natural on the top. It comes out chunky. It looks like it was quickly cut out with scissors. So just understand the difference and see the options that you have, figure out what the best tool is for you. So again, I'm going to go down to select a subject, add a layer mask. Did a good job overall, but there are areas that need to be cleaned up. If I look down where the strap of her shirt should be displayed, I don't see it here. Again, some areas of black that are being left out. So just so we can see the difference from with the refined edge to without the refined edge, we're going to save a copy. Make sure it's a PNG file. I'm going to place this subject in just so we can see the difference between the correct version and this version. Looks okay to start out with, but I will notice a couple issues as we go along. Back over to Photoshop, I'm going to step back. Before I go into adding a layer mask, I'm going to go into Select and select a mask. Again, because of the select and mask, we do want to make sure our view is on that overlay so we can see the red area separating out the background. I want to zoom in, get closer. And particularly, I can notice that there is the strap of her shirt that I want to add into the selection. I'm going to go back over to my brush tool, click and drag over top of the area that I want to add into the selection. If you want to get a little bit more detail, just shrink down your brush size so that you can click and drag over the strap area. You want to make sure it looks natural for the photo itself. If I take a closer look, I may notice that a couple areas of maybe the nose or around the lip were erased out. And because the background is black, it starts to erase out some of her top lip. So you just want to be careful not to erase out the top lip. So I'm going to bring it back into the photo. And underneath of her nose as well has a little bit of shadow because of the black in the background. I need to bring back those areas into the selection. If I want to go over further, I can drag over and then look to erase out. If I hold down Alt, I can erase those areas out, so I'm painting back in the areas of the lip and taking away from the selection. So just take your time, make sure that you're getting as accurate as possible. Zoom in as needed. But if I take a closer look at her head area, we just want to make sure that black areas aren't cutting off elements that make up her face. I can see her shirt is a lot now more realistic and interprets exactly what we're going for. But what we do want to particularly look at are these black gaps that are happening inside the hair strands. And it is confusing because she does have roots that are black. So we want to be careful not to go too deep into her hair roots, but just getting the top edges to eliminate the black section behind. I'm going to increase the size of my brush. Over on the right side, you can see that I have my brush settings, or at the top navigation right now, set up to 25. I'll shrink it down a little bit, and I'm going to switch over to my Refine Edge tool. Second tool, left side. Shrink down my brush a little bit. I'm just going to go into these little black gaps to make sure that these hair strands are being added into the selection. Again, we don't want to go too far into the roots. I'm just going around the outside edges. And it's not always a perfect system. Sometimes you have to redo a couple areas and make sure that strands are being added in the correct manner. But we're just looking to take out this black so it doesn't overwhelm and distract. I'm just going to go around the outside edges, eliminating out the black areas or gaps that we see inside the hair strands. And I'm just clicking and dragging through all these hair strands so it's easy to identify it and separate overall. As I get back down to the back of the neck, it's a lot easier because she is dealing with more just pink hair strands. But any areas that you need to clean up, you can always go back over to the brush tool. I'm just going to add in the back of her strap. With the Refine Edge tool, just want to clean up and make sure that I'm not seeing any of those black areas that took away from it. So I didn't go too deep into the roots, but I did add in as many strands as possible. I cleaned up the nose area, made sure that the lip was now more part of the image. If you feel like it needs to be touched up, again, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more. And I can use my brush tool, shrink it down. And I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I can paint in some areas so I'm not making it thick. But now that I've added in the strap of the shirt, clean up the back and clean up the top of the hair, I'm going to click OK. I'm going to again add a layer mask. You have the bottom option underneath the layers, or go down to the layer mask at the bottom on the taskbar. So with this, if we're doing a separation, it's a lot more minimal than what you may have realized or thought it would look like. But now when we do a comparison, I go over to save a copy. This time I'm going to leave it as a save copy, as a pink hair copy, but change it to a PNG. I'm going to go Insert, Image, Upload from Computer. This time when I'm looking at the top of the hair, though it's not much different, it did eliminate out some of the black gaps or black areas inside the strands, so it's not overwhelmingly distracting. So again, it's just a little bit more edited, cleaned up the strap so it's not cutting off like it is on the bottom of the neck here. On the nose area, it looks a little bit more natural rather than how much it cuts up into her nose here. There's just little elements that are going to really define and separate the subject to make it look more professional. So I'm going to take out this middle image, backspace, scale up the picture as needed. but we are left with a more refined image. And now we're going to get into our puppy, the last image. And close this out. With our puppy image, the same process, but now we're dealing with a white background. And because we have white hair, it is going to be a lot more tedious, and we have to pick out certain elements. We can again go down to the select subject. When I do select subject, it does a pretty good job overall, but there are hair strands down the bottom or chunks of the back of his foot not being selected, or areas over on the right side or top of the head that are not being added. So again, we're going to go up to select, down to select and mask. To clean up these areas, again, with the refine edge tool, I'm going to particularly go around the black strands and eliminate out the little white gaps happening in the black hairs. If I take a closer look, I'm going to click and drag to over top of the black areas, the black strands over top of the ear. Now when I let go, it's a lot more clean in separating out his hair from the background. Don't go too deep into the black, but you can see how much better it is adding in and separating his hair from the white background. Make your brush smaller as needed for certain areas. But when it comes to the outside elements where his hair is kind of blending in with the background, just take your time going around the edges. Trust Photoshop to cut out the areas that we don't want and allow the hair strands to look more natural overall. So I'm going to shrink down my brush a little bit more, but again, just click and drag down the edges, and it'll do a better job to make it look more realistic in where it's cutting out those strands. At the bottom of the paw, make sure that you get the little nails that make up the subject. I also remember that there is this hind leg that's being now cut off. I'm going to go over to my brush tool, add in this entire element of the leg so it is back to what it should be. But back with the refined edge, I just want to soften these areas up. I'm going to click and drag across. It just helps to blend in the subject so it's a lot more natural looking. If it's cutting off too much, just make sure to reduce the size of your brush. And finally go back up the backside, past his hip area, and get the back hair where it meets the black stripe. Remember, you can always go back over to your brush tool. I can see a little area of black that's being cut off that I don't want. I'll go back into my refined edge just to smooth these hairs out. Once we go around the hair, it looks like we have all the areas. I can zoom out. Overall, it looks a lot better than what it did, so I'm going to hit OK. And then add a layer mask. And now it looks a lot softer overall. I want to save this as a PNG. File, save as PNG, save a copy, change the save as type, and we are going to add in our last image to our presentation. Insert image, upload from computer, choose the puppy copy, and place it in. If I do not do this process, making sure that it has the soft edges, if I were to leave it how it was, I'll step back for a moment. Make sure to save it as a PNG. If you do want to take a look at it, you don't have to. Make sure to add the layer mask. But again, if I go into the save a copy, insert the image, upload from computer, when I scale this image up and I do comparison between the left side and the right side, you see how much softer these little hairs are on his ears. It's not leaving a little white gap in between his ear. The hair strands on the side look a lot more natural when we're looking at the right side here, or on the back hind leg. It's not such a sharp, drastic cut of the fur. It looks more like fur. We're seeing the hair strands as a natural type of element, making the puppy look like a soft, fluffy puppy. So just seeing the difference, we're going to now take this one out. We have the refined edges. Once you have those images into each slide, you're going to look to upload this onto Canvas. Have a great day.